But again, Sunday night's the first night of Hanukkah, and that's where I'm going to go with the message tonight. We're going to talk about different things with dealing with Hanukkah, and it's about dedication or rededication. And I'm going to do a little bit about the history of Hanukkah. Most of you are familiar with the story, but I'm going to try to keep it short. Not really. It's pretty long. I'm going to read quite a bit. But just as a reminder of different things about Hanukkah. And before I go too far, though, I want to remind you that Yeshua celebrated Hanukkah. Amen. When I first started coming here, and they said that, Rabbi said that, Yeshua celebrated Hanukkah, and I, okay, show me that. Well, let's go, and that was like the 10th thing that he said, and I went, okay, show me that. So he would turn to it. But Yeshua celebrated Hanukkah in John 10, verse 22. In the complete Jewish Bible, it says, then came Hanukkah in Yerushalayim. It was winter. And Yeshua was walking around inside the temple area in Shlomo's colonnade. Now, in the King James Version, John 10, 22, it says, and it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication. And it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple of Solomon's porch. Now, growing up, I didn't know any better, but I also didn't hear any adults question that. The feast of dedication, the feast of the dedication, what are they talking about? Never heard an adult say, what feast are they talking about? Let's go look that up back in Leviticus. Let's go look that up back in the Torah or in the Old Testament and find out what that is. Never heard anyone question it. And that's just, I don't know, I'm sure most of you can be witness to that also. It was just never questioned. Oh, it was a feast that they had. But nobody questioned what it was. Every time they mention a feast in the New Testament, oh, that's one of those feasts. Well, let's go back in the Old Testament and find out what that is. Now, if you went back in the Old Testament, you wouldn't find out what this was in the Old Testament, because it's not a appointed time, but it is a celebration. It is a feast of the dedication, the celebration of the rededication of the temple. So I'm going to focus on that tonight, dedication or rededication. I have a few excerpts from the book of Maccabees. This is when Antiochus IV Epiphanes ruled. And, when we say Antiochus Epiphanes, we hear, well, he believed he was God. He wasn't the only one. There were 6 or 7 or 8, I quit counting. After they say Epiphanies, I'm like, well, I don't really want to, study them too much other than what they did, only the history of it. But he's not the only one that considered themselves a manifestation of God. He's not the only one. And just the audacity of that boggles my mind when I'm the king, I'm going to rule. Well, I want to be God too. The audacity of that, just the idea of that, well, I'm going to be God. Sure you are. Got it. Probably not. You're probably not going to be God. And a bit of a side note, now I don't have it on the slide, but in John 10, where it talks about Hanukkah, at the end of that, or toward the end of that, verse 30, Yeshua says, I and the Father are one. So it was Hanukkah, and Yeshua is standing at the temple saying, I and the Father are one. That is probably an additional reason that the Judeans were mad at him. Because they're celebrating a victory over someone that had claimed to be God. And now Yeshua is standing here, I and the Father are one. They're celebrating that right now, a rededication of the temple and the fact that they defeated someone that said that same thing. Now, you have to remember, the big difference is Yeshua fulfilled the prophecies. Yeshua was performing miracles right in front of them. So there's that. He can say it and mean it. He can say it and prove it. He was performing miracles while he was saying this. So I encourage you to go back and read that in John. I encourage you to go back and read that and see that it was during that time that he said that, and they were ready to stone him. I think verse 31, the very next verse says, and they picked up stones to stone him. They were pretty upset. We're celebrating Hanukkah, and you're saying that, and they're going to throw stuff at him. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there. read that or noticed that this week, and I thought it was pretty interesting. But I'm going to read from the first book of first chapter of Maccabees. Now remember, as I'm reading this, that it is not technically Scripture. It's in the Apocrypha, but it is not in the different things that we read, the different versions that we're reading. It is in the Apocrypha, but it's history. So don't forget that. It is history. And it is a bit long. Bear with me. What you see on the screen right now is not a whole lot of it. There's more to follow. So just bear with me. But in 1 Maccabees 1, starting in verse 20, it says, in the year 143 after the conquest of Egypt, Antiochus marched with a great army against the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. In his arrogance, he entered the temple and took away the gold altar, the lampstand, with all its equipment. Wow, that's a brave man. I said ignorance, I meant to say, it says in his arrogance. Arrogance. I misspoke there. In his arrogance, he entered the temple and took away the gold altar, the lampstand with all its equipment, the table for the bread offered to the Lord, the cups and bowls, the gold fire pans, the curtain, and the crowns. He also stripped all the gold from the front of the temple and carried off the silver and gold and everything else of value, including all the treasures that he could find stored there. Then he took it all to his own country. He had also murdered many people and boasted arrogantly about it. There was great mourning everywhere in the land of Israel. Rulers and leaders groaned in sorrow. Young men and young women grew weak. The beauty of our women faded. Every bridegroom sang a funeral song, and every bride sat mourning in her room. All our people were clothed with shame, and our land trembled for them. And now I'm going to drop down to verse 41. It says, Antiochus now issued a decree that all nations in his empire should abandon their own customs and become one people. All the Gentiles and even many of the Israelites submitted to this decree. So some people just stepped away from Torah. They adopted the official pagan religion, offered sacrifices to idols, and no longer observed the Sabbath. The king also sent messengers with a decree to Jerusalem and all the towns of Judea, ordering people to follow customs that were foreign to the country. He ordered them not to offer burnt offerings, grain offerings, or wine offerings in the temple, and commanded them to treat Sabbaths and festivals as ordinary work days. He is completely stripping them of their religion, of their heritage, of their foundation of who they are. They were even ordered to defile the temple and the holy things in it. They were commanded to build pagan altars, temples, and shrines, and to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals there. It's disgusting to read. They were forbidden to circumcise their sons and were required to make themselves ritually unclean for every way they could, in every way they could. So they would forget the law which the Lord had given through Moses and would disobey all its commands. The penalty of disobeying the king's decree was death. Again, it's disgusting to read. He is completely shutting them out from the temple, completely shutting them out from their right to worship God, from their ability, from their heritage. And needless to say, things were bad. Couldn't circumcise their sons, sacrificed pigs on the altar. So obviously, during this time, there was no such thing as freedom of religion. There was not. So I encourage you not to take for granted what we have here. Because if he was in charge now, or someone like him was in charge, and there are people like that in the world today. There are leaders like that in the world today that are in charge of their country. We would not be able to do what we're doing right here, right now. On a Friday night, on a Shabbat, on a Sunday morning, on a Tuesday night, on a Wednesday night, on any night of the week. There are places in this world that you can't do what we're doing. And the penalty in some of those places for disobeying those decrees is death. In this world today, in some places. So again, don't take for granted what we have here. Enjoy the freedoms we have and thank those that give you that freedom. Amen? And now the mission to go to Jerusalem and purify the temple. 1 Maccabees 4. Judas and his brothers said, I'm starting at verse 36. Judas and his brothers said, now that our enemies have been defeated, let's go to Jerusalem to purify the temple and rededicate it. Now, it seems like this just jumped from one spot right to another. Here we go. This took a day. We're done. This was 7, 8, 9 years that they fought all these different battles to make this happen. Verse 37, so the whole army was assembled and went up to Mount Zion. There they found the temple abandoned, the altar profaned, the gates burned down, the courtyards grown up in forest of weeds, and the priest rooms torn down. In their sorrow they tore their clothes, cried loudly, threw ashes on their heads, and fell face down on the ground. When the signal was given on the trumpets, everyone cried out to the Lord. Then Judas ordered some of his soldiers to attack the men in the fort, and he purified the temple. He chose some priests who were qualified and who were devoted to the law. They purified the temple. They took the stones that had been defiled and put them in an unclean place. They discussed what should be done with the altar of burnt offerings which had been desecrated by the Gentiles, and decided to tear it down so that it would not stand there as a monument to their shame. So they tore down the altar and they put the stones in a suitable place on the temple hill where they were to keep where they were kept until a prophet should appear and decide what to do with them. Then they took uncut stones as the law of Moses required and built a new altar like the old one. They repaired the temple inside and out and dedicated its courtyards. They made new utensils for worship and brought the lampstands, the altar of incense, and the table for the bread into the temple. They burned incense on the altar and lit the lamps on the lampstand, and there was light in the temple. There was light in the temple. They placed the loaves of bread on the table, hung the curtains, and completed all the work. The temple had now been restored. The Maccabees won back the temple, and that's what we celebrate every year. They cleansed and rededicated the temple, all of the utensils, to the worship of God. Now, very similar to an account in the Bible where they had to cleanse and purify the temple again. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 1 through 7 says Hezekiah was 25 years old when he began his reign and ruled for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Aviah, the daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right from Adonai's perspective, following the example of everything David, his ancestor, had done. In the first month of the first year of his reign, he reopened the doors of the house of Adonai and repaired them. In the first month of the first year. So immediately he had a plan. He knew what he was going to do. I think he knew what he was going to do before he took over. As soon as I take over, I'm restoring the temple. And that's what he did. Verse 4 says, then he brought in the Kohanim and the Leviim, assembled them in the open space to the east, and said to them, listen to me, Leviim. Consecrate yourselves now, consecrate the house of Adonai, the God of your ancestors, and remove the filth from the holy place. For our ancestors acted treacherously. They did what was evil from the perspective of Adonai our God. They abandoned him. They turned their faces away from where Adonai lives and turned their backs on him. They sealed the doors of the vestibule, put out the lamps, and stopped burning incense and offering burnt offerings in the holy place to the God of Israel. They stopped worshiping God in the temple. Down to verse 15 says they gathered their kinsmen, consecrated themselves, and in keeping with the king's order and Adonai's words, went in to cleanse the house of Adonai. The Kohanim went in to cleanse the inner part of the house of Adonai, all the unclean things they found in the sanctuary of Adonai. They brought out into the courtyard of the house of Adonai, where the Leviim took and carried them out to the Vadi Kidron. They began consecrating on the first day of the month, and on the 8th day of the month, they reached the vestibule of Adonai. Then they consecrated the house of Adonai in 8 more days. So that on the 16th day of the first month, they had finished. Then they went to Hezekiah the king in the palace and said, we have cleansed all the house of Adonai, including the altar for burnt offerings, with all its equipment, and the table for the showbread and all its equipment. Moreover, we have reconditioned and consecrated all the articles that King Ahaz threw out during his reign when he was sinning, and they are there in front of the altar of Adonai. So there's two accounts of the temple and all the utensils and all the things that were used to worship Adonai. They were thrown out. They were destroyed. They were unclean. They sacrificed pigs on the altar of God in the temple. But now they have it back. Now they have rededicated the temple. Amen? Now I know this was a lot to read. Thanks for bearing with me. Like, okay, we can read it. And I know it was a lot to read, but I read all that to say this. In each of these examples, the temple, the utensils had been either destroyed or defiled. But also, in each of these examples, the temple and the utensils were cleansed, purified, and rededicated to service to God. If the temple, now again, remember this is all the equipment, everything that's used has been rededicated. If the temples and the utensils can be purified, cleansed, and rededicated to service for God, then why not you? I know that was a lot to read, but it brought me all to this point. We just read how the temple, the utensils, the menorah, all these things were rededicated to God. And if they can be rededicated, these are items. These are things they had to rebuild. And that got dedicated to the service of God. And if that can happen, then why can't you be dedicated or rededicated to the service of God? You are God's temple. You are the temple of God. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16 and 17. Don't you know that you people are God's temple? And that God's Spirit lives in you. So if anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you yourselves are that temple. Wow! That's exciting. We are God's temple. We should be dedicated. We should be dedicated to God. If you're not dedicated to God, and you were before, now you can be rededicated to God. If you feel you're not as close to God today as you were yesterday, last week, last year, you can rededicate yourself to God. Amen? My mom always said that if you are not as close to God today as you were yesterday, you're backsliding. I was like, Mom, she goes, think about it. If you're not as close today as you were yesterday, yeah, okay, Mom, you're right. It's one of those times where you go, she's right. You can be rededicated for service to God. 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20 says, or don't you know that your body is a temple for the Ruach HaKodesh who lives inside you, whom you received from God? The fact is, you don't belong to yourselves, for you were bought at a price. So use your bodies to glorify God. Amen? We are God's temple. We must be purified, cleansed, and set apart for God. Hebrews 9, verse 21 and 22 says, likewise he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the things used in its ceremonies. In fact, according to the Torah, almost everything is purified with blood. Indeed, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. Amen? Yeshua's blood is how we are purified and cleansed and dedicated and rededicated to God. There is no other way. And you've heard, I've heard it, so I'm sure you've heard it. We all worship the same God. You just get there a different way. No, you don't. Because my God sent his son. Yeshua said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. He didn't say no man comes through the Father but through me unless you're different and you want to go a different route. That's not what he said. There is no other way. And I've also heard people say, I invited a friend of mine here years and years ago. It's been, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. He's like, well, I don't know. I haven't been to church service or any service in a long, long time. And he actually said that. He said, I might burst into flames when I walk through the door. I said, hey, brother, we're all sinners. We've all sinned. Romans 3:23 says that. We've all sinned. We've all been there. No one's perfect. And it's just that thought that you can be rededicated. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9 through 11. Don't you know that unrighteous people will have no share in the kingdom of God? Don't delude yourselves. Now this, when I read this, I keep hearing, and again, I hear a lot of things, and I talk to a lot of people. Well, it doesn't say anything about whatever they're talking about in the New Testament. That's all Old Testament stuff. Well, let's read this. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. Don't you know that unrighteous people will have no share in the kingdom of God? Don't delude yourselves. People who engage in sex before marriage, who worship idols, who engage in sex after marriage with someone other than their spouse, who engage in active or passive homosexuality, who steal, who are greedy, who get drunk, who assail people with contemptuous language, who rob. None of them will share in the kingdom of God. I'm not the one saying it. I'm just reading it. It's written right here. Now you notice it wasn't a hierarchy of sin. One's not worse than the other. They're all the same. Sin is sin. Some of you used to do these things, but you have cleansed yourself. You have been set apart for God. You have come to be counted righteous through the power of the Lord Yeshua the Messiah and the Spirit of our God. And it says right there, you can be rededicated. Some of you used to do these things, but you have cleansed yourselves. And how did we cleanse ourselves? Through the blood. It's the only way. I'm getting excited. I'm telling you, some of you used to do these things. But you have cleansed yourselves. You have been set apart for God. So Hanukkah is about being dedicated to God. Now we talk about it's the Feast of Dedication. It's the rededication of the temple. But it's about being dedicated to God. It's not just dedicated on a Friday night or a Sunday morning or a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night. It's not just being dedicated when you're here. We're all dedicated here. It showed tonight with Den and Chris up here. They're dedicated, right? Joshua doing the announcements for me. Dedication. We're all dedicated when we're here, but are you dedicated when you go out that door? Are you dedicated at work? Are you dedicated at school? For those of you that are in here that are still in school, middle school, high school, are you dedicated there? You know, I've always said, they took prayer out of school. As long as there are tests for children to take, there will be prayer in school. God, please let me pass this test. But are you dedicated out there in the world? And we're all out there in the world. We have to live there. We have to work there. We have to shop there. We have to buy groceries there. Are you dedicated out there? Can people see it in you? If they can't see it in you, how dedicated are you? If you act just like them when you're at work, saying things that you wouldn't say in front of your mom or your grandmother, nobody says those things in front of their grandmother. I ask people all the time when I hear them say foul language, do you talk like that in front of your mom? Well, okay. Do you talk like that in front of your grandmother? Oh, no. Well, then don't talk like that in front of me. Or they'll say, and it's a loaded question. You know, when I ask that question, that's a loaded question. Whatever they give me an answer to, they're going to be wrong. Do you speak like that in front of your mom? Yeah. Well, I'm not your mom. So it's a loaded question. I like those loaded questions. Do you put your feet on your furniture at home? No. Well, then don't do it here. And if they say yes, well, this isn't your home. I have a lot of loaded questions. But we see that Hanukkah is about dedication. But earlier we mentioned the light. And we know that Hanukkah is about the light. And Josh prayed over the children tonight, and like I do every week, that they would be a light to those around them. The children will be a light to the nations. Amen? So Hanukkah is also about God's light. Psalm 4 verse 6 says, many ask, who can show us some good. Adonai, lift the light of your face over us. Psalm 18:28, for you, Adonai, light my lamp. Adonai, my God, lights up my darkness. God keeps us out of darkness with his light. He had to put Moses in the cleft of the rock. Exodus 33, verse 18 says, But Moshe said, I beg you to show me your glory. He replied, I will cause all my goodness to pass before you, and in your presence I will pronounce the name of Adonai. Moreover, I show you favor to whomever I will, and I display mercy to whomever I will. But my face, he continued, you cannot see, because a human being cannot look at me and remain alive. Here, he said, is a place near me. Stand on the rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you inside a crevice in the rock and cover you with my hands until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face is not to be seen. Because God is light. Now let's look at what happened to Moses after he was in the physical presence of God. Now remember, he didn't even see God's face, but he was in his presence. Exodus 34, verse 29 and 30 says, when Moshe came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, he didn't realize that the skin of his face was sending out rays of light as a result of his talking with Adonai. When Aaron and the people of Israel saw Moshe, the skin of his face was shining, and they were afraid to approach him. Can you imagine being in the presence of God and then leaving the presence of God, but still have his light shining through you? God's light was so powerful that he had rays of light coming from his skin that people could physically, visibly see because he was in the presence of God. Hanukkah is about Yeshua's light. John 1, verse 4 through 9. In him was life, and the life was the light of mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not suppressed it. There was a man sent from God whose name was Yochanan. He came to be a testimony, to bear witness concerning the light, so that through him everyone might put his trust in God and be faithful to him. He himself, talking about Yochanan, John, he himself was not that light. No, he came to bear witness concerning the light. This was the true light which gave light to everyone entering the world. The true light that gives light to everyone entering the world. Now, I've mentioned this before. It seems that the Southeast Conference is always real close to Hanukkah. So I get to give messages about Hanukkah. And somebody said, well, that'll make it easy. Not all the time. But I have mentioned this before with the Shamash. Now, the Shamash, if you don't know, is the highest light on the menorah or the Hanukkah. And that represents Yeshua. The Shamash is the caretaker or the servant and is used to light the rest of the candles. Matthew 20, verse 28 says, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Yeshua came to serve. That light, the Shamash, is the servant of the menorah. Again, wow. The things you find when you read and when you see things that, and again, these are things that, this is in John. Growing up, didn't catch this, didn't see this. Philippians 2, verse 5 through 11 says, let your attitude toward one another be governed by your being in union with the Messiah Yeshua. Though he was in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God something to be possessed by force. On the contrary, he emptied himself, in that he took the form of a slave by becoming like human beings are. And when he appeared as a human being, he humbled himself still more by becoming obedient even to death on a stake as a criminal. Now listen to this. Therefore God raised him to the highest place and gave him the name above every name. the highest place on the menorah, the shamash, the light, the servant. God raised him to the highest place and gave him the name above every name. That in honor of the name given Yeshua, every knee will bow in heaven, on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will acknowledge that Yeshua the Messiah is Adonai, to the glory of God the Father. And remember John 1:9 said this was the true light which gives light. He was placed and raised him. He was raised to the highest place, and he gives light. Just like the shamash in a menorah or a Hanukkah. He gives light. And finally, Hanukkah is about your light. We've talked about God's light. We've talked about rededicating your temple. We've talked about God's light. We've talked about Yeshua's light. Hanukkah is about your light. Matthew 5:14 through 16 says, you are light for the world. And this is Yeshua speaking. You are light for the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Likewise, when people light a lamp, they don't cover it with a bowl, but put it on a lampstand so that it shines for everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so that they may see the good things you do and praise your Father in heaven. And that's what I was talking about a minute ago. When your light is lit, your lamp is lit, don't hide it. Show it to people at work. Show them why you're so happy. If you're grumpy all the time, they don't want any of that. Let your light shine. Amen? Please stand with me. If I could have the prayer teams come. And this is a time to rededicate yourself. If you've never dedicated yourself, the prayer teams can help you. If you've fallen away and you want to rededicate your life to God, they can help you. Remember, without a purified temple, the light of the menorah would not be able to shine. It just wouldn't have happened. They rededicated the temple. And likewise for you, without a purified, rededicated temple, your light will not be able to shine.